What's that? Of course.
Right, hello everybody. Thank you all so much for coming to the discussion panel today. My name is Izzy. I'm a fourth year Law and Society student. I'll be kind of the manager of this. So if you all have any questions, you can pull me aside. I'll be sitting over here at the front. Today's event is going to be centered around the First Amendment and specifically what it looks like under our current administration. So some of the topics we're going to cover are first, the press and why it's so crucial for sustaining democracy. Second, the right to protest and what the limits are. And three, hopefully we can analyze some current events that demonstrate the complexities and importance of the First Amendment. Our panel today consists of two Jefferson students, Amina over here, who is a fourth year Law and Society student, and then Suday, who is a first year Law and Society student. And then alongside them in the middle here, we're joined by Dr. Amy Sanders, who is the John and Ann Curley Chair in First Amendment Studies at Penn State. Dr. Sanders is also a licensed attorney, as well as an award-winning former journalist. Her work is focused on media freedom, access to information and government transparency, freedom of speech, and the regulation of social media and emerging technologies. Essentially, she's our expert today, and we're so excited to have this fruitful conversation with you all. Now, before we begin, I want to note that we do have free pizza out in this room over here, as well as soda and cookies, so feel free to help yourself. If you need a bathroom, it's also right over here next to this room. We just ask that you please hold any questions until the end. We do have 4 pre-vetted questions that we got from students on campus. We're going to ask those first, and then if time permits, we'll open it up to you guys. Thank you again for all coming today, and please give our panel a round of applause.
So, back a little bit so I can see both of you. Okay. So we're going to open up today's discussion with just hearing what the term First Amendment means in general and specifically as a professor, since Dr. Sanders is. So when you hear the term First Amendment, what does it actually mean to you in your everyday life as a professor?
So my entire academic life really has been possible because of the First Amendment. So you heard a little bit ago, I actually came to college as a pre-med major, don't tell anyone. Organic chemistry ended that very quickly. But I quickly switched to be a journalism major and a justice systems major. I was a high school journalist, and I realized just how powerful it was to be able to inform people. And the First Amendment makes that possible, right? The really amazing thing about the First Amendment is there are really 5.5 freedoms. Like if you think about, you've got freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the freedom to petition the government for a redress of grievances, which we're seeing Saturday with the No Kings protest, right? The freedom of assembly, also, right, protest. And then you have the 2 religious freedoms in the First Amendment. You have the Free Exercise Clause and the Establishment Clause. So 45 words give us all of those rights. It's so powerful. And when I started to realize the real power of that, it just, like, there's a draw there for me. The role that it plays in democracy, the power that it gives all of us to use our voices to make change. That was kind of what I wanted my career to be about.
Yeah. And thinking about the First Amendment, I mean, the traits that so Americans hold dearly, the freedom, justice, liberty, all of those are basically outlined in the First Amendment, the first thing when you read the Constitution. So when you inform students today and when you're teaching students about freedom and freedom of speech in the First Amendment, do you think students today truly have freedom of speech in the classroom, outside of classrooms, or do you think there's limits to that?
Oh, there's absolutely limits, right? One of the big myths is that the freedom of speech under the First Amendment gives you the right to say anything you want to say, anytime you want to say, anywhere you want to say it. And that's certainly not true, right? There are absolutely restrictions on freedom of speech. And there are constitutional ways to limit freedom of speech. But I do think right now, particularly for students, we're in a really precarious time. For journalists, we're in a really precarious time. We're seeing an administration right now that doesn't want to allow freedom of speech for viewpoints that it doesn't agree with. And particularly one of the distinctions that most people don't understand about the First Amendment is the First Amendment only protects us from the government interfering with our right to speak. So what does that mean? That means that faculty, students, staff at private universities don't have that same protection that students at Penn State would have, right? So there's absolutely some tiers to that system, right? And so, on a private university campus, your rights are going to be very different than when you walk across the street to a public sidewalk. And that's kind of a remnant of how the Constitution was designed, right? The framers were concerned about the government's power versus the people. Because of what was happening, because of how Britain was treating the colonies. We're seeing a shift now, and there are other players out there, private interests, who are interested in limiting our free speech rights, right? Whether that is big tech companies, whether that is, various religious groups, whether it's university administrations. So I do think we're kind of at a point where particularly students are feeling the pressure that they are not getting their full First Amendment rights.
So we can talk about censorship on campus, and if anybody in law classes remember slapstick lawsuits, all type of stuff. So different types of censorship that you said that private interests follow through with to keep people in check. So when we think about censorship today under the Trump administration as well, do you think this idea of a free press is still prevalent, and the importance of free press to our democracy?
Oh, there's no doubt that we don't have democracy without a free and independent press, right? If you think about, you may have heard the press called the Fourth Estate, right? The idea behind that is that there are three branches of government: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And then, in a democracy, we have this sort of fourth branch, right, which is a free and independent press. And the role of the free and independent press is to help citizens ensure that the government is doing what it's supposed to do, right? Engaging in that oversight function, that watchdog function. And when we see the erosion of a free press, we have two really important implications for that. The first, of course, is that those folks who are in power think that there's less oversight and they can get away with things. The second, of course, is that we have a less informed citizenry. And so we don't know what the government is doing. And so we don't know, do we want to vote our representatives out? Do we need some kind of, constitutional amendment to change things? If we're not informed, we can't take that action.
I think that's the issue. And then Sudhir will ask about the media, and she'll go into the media, but I think that's the issue. There's a lot of the citizenry doesn't know. Yeah. And then I think freedom of speech allows citizens to, and be able to inform themselves, but like you said, censorship. And then I think it's less so in limitations on the freedom of speech, but more the fact that our media and our speech has become kind of as a way for people to, manipulate it.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So there's a bunch of different factors that come to play that get us where we are in 2026, right? One of those factors is the consolidation of media ownership in the United States. So starting in the mid-1990s, the government allowed deregulation, which allowed local newspapers and local radio stations to be bought up. And now we really face a media system where there are 5 or 6 big players, right? And when that happens, and particularly when you have entertainment companies merging with news companies, right? I'll give you the example of CBS, right? You all are probably aware that CBS was facing a lawsuit from Donald Trump in Texas over 60 Minutes. This was a lawsuit that even the worst First Amendment attorney could go in and win, right? But CBS settled that lawsuit. And it settled that lawsuit because it had a merger between its parent company, Paramount, which is a big entertainment company, and Skydance, pending before the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. And Brendan Carr, who is the chair of the FCC, basically used a regulatory threat to encourage CBS to settle that lawsuit. And so this merger had been pending for a really long time, right? This is a major entity that's publicly traded that has shareholders who want to make money, right? And what happened is Paramount put that interest in making money for shareholders over the journalistic values of CBS to defend itself. And so it settled the lawsuit. It's paying the Trump administration, the Presidential Library, something like $15 or $16 million, right? The merger went through. CBS is now owned by an even bigger, even more powerful media company. And ultimately what that means is the journalism interests, the news and information interests are being subsumed by the entertainment interests, right? Social media, movies, music, all of that kind of stuff is making more money. And so that's what the shareholders are valuing.
So speaking about like huge shows and conglomerates, do shows like Jimmy Kimmel Live have the same First Amendment protections as traditional news outlets like CBS, which you just talked about?
So yes and no in various ways, right? So the First Amendment protects everyone equally. Mm-hmm. A lot of people think that journalists have special rights under the First Amendment. They don't. Citizens and journalists have the same rights under the First Amendment, right? Mm-hmm. Non-citizens have the same rights under the First Amendment. We've heard a lot of talk about how students who are in the United States on visas, right, shouldn't be able to protest. They shouldn't be able to write newspaper articles or editorials that are critical of the administration. That's all a bunch of hooey, right? The Constitution doesn't say the First Amendment only applies to citizens. It applies to everybody. But here's the difference. So CBS is a private company. Well, they're publicly traded, but they're not the government, right? And so CBS and ABC can make decisions about whatever shows they want to carry and what shows they don't want to carry. In the same way that a bookstore can decide what books it wants to sell and what books it doesn't want to sell, right? And so does Jimmy Kimmel have the First Amendment rights to say the things that he was saying? Absolutely. Does ABC have the right to take him off the air? Absolutely, right? And if you only learn one thing today, right, the most important thing to learn is speech has consequences. And so Jimmy Kimmel absolutely had the right to say what he said about Charlie Kirk, but ABC had the right to take him off the air. Now, what caused them to put him back on the air? Us, viewers, right? People took a stand and used their First Amendment rights to say that they disagreed with ABC. And so ABC changed course. That just shows you how powerful speech can be.
What do you think the implications are on the population with constantly like back and forth news outlets and censorship and this like constant, I would say, manipulation of the media where you're not really sure what is right and what is wrong or what to watch and what not to watch? And since obviously our population is being firsthand affected by that, what are the implications of that, and then in connection to the administration, what we say, freedom of speech, like that?
So a lot of things. First of all, it's harder than ever to figure out where to get trusted news and information, right? We have generative AI tools that the average person can use to make synthetic video and audio that you and I can't necessarily tell the difference of whether it's real or not, right? We have social media platforms where everybody can spread whatever they want to spread with little to no consequence, whether it's true or not, right? Little to no consequence to them. We also have, because of the conglomeration of media, we also have a pretty rapid decline in the number of newspapers in this country, in the amount of advertising dollars that are supporting news organizations and quality journalism, right? We've had a pretty dramatic decline in the amount of local news coverage, right? So like your, neighborhood daily newspaper, for example. That makes it harder for all of us to get information. And so I think there are a couple of ways to sort of turn this around. The first has to be with us. I told you the power of the audience reacting to Kimmel being pulled off the air. Well, our dollars speak. And so when we support quality news and information flourishes. But when we don't support it, when we take our dollars to, a random news influencer on TikTok or someone on YouTube, that money doesn't go to support local news and trusted information, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is platforms like Facebook and X and TikTok are incentivized financially to show us unverified content. There's all kinds of psychological research that says that rage baiting actually encourages you to continue scrolling, to continue watching, right? The longer you scroll, the more you watch, the more advertising money those platforms are making, right? And so there's very little incentive for them to take that kind of content down. There's nothing that requires them in the US to take that kind of content down. Now, in Europe is passing laws, the EU is passing laws to target videos and social media content that is false, that has hate speech, that's misogynistic, that's Islamophobic, right? That promotes terrorism. So other parts of the world are taking action against that. We're not here in the US yet.
I think it's hard to take action against that when our own president is posting AI videos.
I mean, it's, I don't want to make it sound simple, but the first step is for Congress to change Section 230. So Section 230 is a law that was passed in the mid-1990s, before y'all were born, when I was, a teenager, that basically says platforms like Facebook and TikTok and YouTube are not responsible for the content that other people post. So if somebody posts something, let's say they use generative AI to make a fake nude photo of you, and they post it online, right? You can't sue the platform. Now, you could potentially sue the individual person who posted that, assuming you could figure out who that was, right? That's a challenge. And even if you go to YouTube or you go to X and you say, but look, this is hate speech, look, this is a generative AI pornographic image of me, I want you to take it down. They don't have to. Now, that's not the only way to do things. There's another law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, right? Copyright holders make money off of their music, their shows, and who produces music and shows? Big media companies. They have Paramount, they have a vested interest in protecting that so that you can't see your favorite shows because somebody posts them on YouTube. You have to be able to subscribe to their platform, right? The Digital Millennium Copyright Act says, if somebody posts my copyrighted content on a platform and I notify that platform, they have to immediately take it down. They have to investigate whether or not the person who posted it had the right to post it. And if they don't do those things, I can hold them liable. We could do that with all of the content on social media, right? The non-consensual sharing of pornographic images. We could do that with hate speech. We could do that with defamatory content, right? We could change Section 230 into what we call a notice and takedown regulatory approach, where when I give you notice that somebody's posting, right, defamatory speech about me, speech that invades my privacy and shares my personal information, if we start to hold them responsible, they're going to change their ways.
Yeah.
Europe is starting to hold them responsible, and we're seeing changes happen on these big platforms.
Do you think that's a step that would be taken here, or is that unlikely?
I would love that to happen here. That will not happen here, and here's why. So, it costs a whole lot of money to get elected to Congress. Mm-hmm. That's not money that you and I pay, right? My $5 donation or $25 donation to a candidate that I support isn't what's going to get them elected to Congress. It's billions of dollars that go to political candidates from big tech companies, from the billionaires who own those big tech companies. Well, I learned this lesson in law school. I received a full ride scholarship to law school. Little did I know that the expectation was like, hey, we're going to pay for you to go to law school, but the expectation is that like you're going to go work in big law, you're going to be really successful, you're going to donate money back to the school, you're going to employ our grads. As you can see, I did not do that. I was a real letdown to my law school. But the same expectation comes with the money that these donors put towards getting candidates elected. So there's absolutely no incentive for lawmakers to regulate big tech companies because the big tech companies are the ones paying to get them into office. Yeah. So until we get that kind of money out of elections, I don't think we'll see change. We call that regulatory capture if you're interested in sort of the jargony term for it.
So publicly funded elections.
Publicly funded elections.
Okay.
Europe does it well.
So speaking about, and Sude will pick up right now, we're going to kind of turn this topic onto our rights on our campus and especially as students. So you can go ahead.
As we know, like there's a protest this weekend about no kinks.
Yeah.
Do you think like if college students made like a group and came on campus to protest about it, do you think they have any rights?
Depends on if you're at a public or a private university.
No.
So here's the thing that I would encourage all of you to think about. The First Amendment, only public universities are required to follow the First Amendment. But there are private universities out there who have adopted policy statements that say, we understand the importance of these rights, and we're going to protect our students' rights and follow the First Amendment, right? And so I've seen student groups organize and encourage their university administration to adopt a statement saying, we believe in these principles and we're going to give students their full First Amendment rights, even though we don't have to. The challenge on a public university, of course, is, let's take Columbia, for example, right? Columbia was sort of ground zero for pro-Palestinian protests, and a number of students were disciplined and sanctioned for engaging in those protests. Private universities have every right to say absolutely no protests whatsoever, right? Unfortunately, private universities could even go so far as to potentially say, we'll allow you to engage in this kind of protest, but not this kind of protest, right? Private employers are the same way. You work for a private employer, you work for Target, you work for Starbucks. They can absolutely say things like, you can't wear your campaign badge to work, right? You can't wear a t-shirt that has a pro-LGBTQ message to work. And so for private university students, the very most effective way to exercise your First Amendment rights is to figure out what are the boundaries of your campus, to walk right across that street onto a public sidewalk and have your protest there. That's the way to do it.
Can students be punished for participating in protests?
Yep.
Private university students, absolutely, and public university students too, if. So one of the big issues, before I was at Penn State, I was at the University of Texas, and the University of Texas has a campus-wide free speech policy that says it is a public forum where, well, they changed it, where public protest is permissible. The First Amendment protects lawful protest, and that's an important limitation. I don't mean peaceful protest, because if you go back and you look at the civil rights era, right, people are shouting, people are, holding signs, they're angry. That is absolutely lawful, right? The First Amendment doesn't protect conduct that breaks laws. So when protesters trespass onto private property, when protesters try to obstruct building entrances, when protesters go onto a highway and try to stop traffic, that conduct can be punished, right? Now, what was happening on the University of Texas campus is students had gathered in this designated spot where protest was supposed to be allowed, and they were peaceful, they were lawful, they were singing, they were chanting, and the governor called in the state police to arrest them. That's a violation of their First Amendment rights, because they had every right on a public university campus to be engaged in protest there. So when you're protesting, when you're exercising those First Amendment rights, you just have to make sure that the conduct isn't unlawful, right? Another good example is graffiti, right? People say to me, well, graffiti is a form of expression. Well, it is, but it's also a form of vandalism when you're doing it someplace that you don't have permission to do it, right? So you have to think about, do I have permission to be here? Am I on a public sidewalk? Am I in a public place, right? And am I making sure that I'm not breaking reasonable laws like noise ordinances?
So I would say, like, at what point in the spectrum, you know, as students, like, we all expect to get jobs. Most of them are going to be for big conglomerations. We're going to be limited to a certain extent, not to be Debbie Downer, but we are. But where does civil disobedience fall in the spectrum of, like, making sure you're pushing the boundaries to the correct level without overdoing it?
Yep. So I say this to students all the time. You want to make sure that you are working someplace that aligns with your values. The most important thing that I can say about my career is I wake up every morning and can look myself in the mirror and respect the decisions that I've made in my career. And if an employer says to me, the fact that you got arrested for lawful protest supporting democracy is a deal breaker and I'm not going to employ you, like, listen, my moral compass and loyalty are to two things, right? One, the Constitution, and two, a democratic society. And I don't want to work for an entity that's not willing to at least have that conversation. I made some pretty difficult choices to leave the University of Texas because I felt like there was going to be a time in the very near future where my administration wasn't going to defend my right to teach the things that I'm an expert on, right? That they weren't going to defend my right to write the things that I wanted to write. And that was a difficult decision. But I wake up now knowing it was the right decision. Because if I'm not going to defend these values that I hold so dear, how can I expect anyone else to, right? It's the same way I feel about voting. So I taught in the Middle East for more than 5 years. And my second week in the Middle East, a student came up to me. I taught students from more than 40 countries. It was absolutely an amazing experience. Second week, one of my students came up to me and said, Professor, can you explain to me why people don't vote in the United States? People in my country are literally dying to fight for our right to vote in municipal elections, like city government. And you're telling me that in many instances, a majority of eligible voters in the United States don't vote. And I said, I wish I could explain it to you. I can explain it now in 2026. We have taken this experiment called democracy for granted. And we are living in a moment where we are seeing the results of that, right? And it's not just about getting to the polls and voting. You have to educate yourself. And we've talked about what the news and information ecosystem looks like out there. It's very hard to educate yourself. But even those positions that you don't think matter, like the school board, right? Well, the school boards in Pennsylvania are deciding what books can be in school libraries. They're deciding what bathrooms students can use, right? What clubs students can participate in or sports students can participate in. Like, if you care about any of those things, you have an obligation to educate yourself about who's running for school board and go vote. And unfortunately, we have a government that is doing everything in its power to make it harder and harder for us to vote, right? We either have to wait in long lines, some people can't cast mail-in ballots, And that angers me enough that I want to vote even more, right? I'm going to go stand in that line if it means I have to stand in line for 3 or 4 hours to vote, because it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. Yeah.
So because of that, I feel as though on campus, a lot of students have felt like a personal initiative to push true journalism. And I think it's easier for the average person to be a journalist now because anybody can virtually take a video of a riot or protest and upload it online. So with the extreme levels of censorship in official media, how do you think students should approach true journalism if they feel like they have a personal need to push it out? And is that even safe for students to do on a campus, on a private campus, on a public campus?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing that you need to understand is that as citizens, we all have the same rights as journalists, right? And so the most important thing that any one of us can do is take responsibility for our communication and making sure that our communication is truthful, accurate, and responsible, right? And that means not sharing that post that really angers you until you know it's true. You may have seen there was a post going around about police canines biting ICE agents at the airports. Apparently, the post was that 2 separate police canines at 2 separate airports bit ICE agents. I'm a dog mom. And I was like, oh, hell yeah. Like, dogs are such good judges of people. Like, those people probably had it coming. And initially I was like, oh, I'm so going to share that. That made my day. But then I couldn't find anything verifying whether or not it was true. Disappointing. And so, I sent it to my mom, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure this isn't true, but it made my day, and I know that you need a little humor too, right? But that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, right? It's so easy for us to share information, but when we are sharing things uncritically and we don't know if it's true or not, we're part of the problem. We're not part of the solution, right? The other thing that I would tell you is one of the most important things we can do as citizens that is an act of journalism is going and being places, right? Going to city council meetings, going to meetings that you're allowed to go to on campus for your student government, right? As citizens, we have an obligation to monitor the people who are in power. My feeling is I'm never going to wait for an invitation. If somebody wants to try to kick me out of a space, that's a different story. But I'm never going to wait for an invitation because the city council, the school board, the Penn State Board of Trustees, who is a routine offender, they're never going to invite you to be there because they don't want us there, right? And one of the best ways that we can hold government accountable is simply by being present. There are groups of people around the country called court watchers. And all they do is go into court, and I'm not kidding you when I say make sure things like the judge isn't falling asleep during the trial. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy, right? And that very accountability, the idea that a court watcher could be in your courtroom is gonna make public servants, more responsible, right? Because they don't wanna be the person who gets outed for not doing their job. And so it's little stuff like that we don't think about as acts of journalism, but they absolutely are. And I think that's really, really important. And there are things that you can do on your campus, but you're also a part of the Philadelphia community, right? And so there are things that you can do out in your community to make sure that democracy is working for everyone, that government is working for everyone.
Yeah. And, we live in Philadelphia, and obviously people here go to the city all the time. And part of being, active individuals and stuff like that, and, perpetuating our own journalism, when we're interacted, let's say like we're in the city and we're interacting with ICE agents and all that type of stuff, how do you suggest we as students under a private like enterprise, how do we even begin to interact with the law force, ICE agents, even just being a bystander? How do you even,
So the first thing to understand is that a majority of the federal courts have ruled that citizens have a right to film police in public when they're carrying out their duties, right? So that's the first thing that's most important. But that doesn't mean that you can interfere, right? So there are absolutely times when law enforcement can say, I need you to step back for your safety. And they do that with journalists all the time, right? For example, if a broadcast journalist is reporting from an active fire, right? The fire department or law enforcement might say, we need you to step back because if this building blows up, you're going to blow up too, right? And so law enforcement does have a right to give you lawful orders to stand back, but they don't have a right to tell you not to record. But here's the catch. Not every police officer knows all the rules. Not every police officer wants to follow all the rules. And I say that my dad was a police officer for 40 years, right? And in that particular moment is not the best time to try to educate them on your First Amendment rights. Because what's gonna happen, unfortunately, is you're gonna wind up in handcuffs, right? So I always tell my students, you can absolutely go and you can record protests, you can record ICE doing their work, especially if you're staying on public property, but you need to follow their lawful orders. And you don't want to be in a situation where you wind up in handcuffs and you're trying to figure out how to get yourself bailed out of jail, right? At the same time, there are also groups that you can work with to be legal observers, right? And there is strength in numbers. Yeah. The most important thing that I tell my students is don't go out there alone, right? Don't go to a protest alone. Don't go, as a documenter alone. Don't go as a legal observer alone. You are always better off with a buddy. You are always better off letting people know where you are and when you should be back wherever you are. And I never thought I would say this. Like, I didn't think in my lifetime it would come to this, but I will give you an example. So, when in last May, I was driving from Pennsylvania back to Texas. My mom was still in Texas. I had my dogs in the car, had my soccer mom minivan that I had rented, like we were doing this 3-day road trip. And I'm driving through Nashville at like 6 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday morning. Totally innocuous, right? And as I'm driving down the freeway that's like 6 lanes of traffic, all of a sudden a huge swarm of police cars come off of the entrance ramp onto the freeway and stop all of the traffic. And I see the officers get out of their cars, they have their canines, and I'm just like, what is going on? And I immediately called my mom. Like, I'm a lawyer, y'all. I immediately called my mom and I said, Mom, I'm gonna share my location with you. I'm on this freeway, I'm in Nashville, this is what's happening, I don't know what's going on, right? This is the car I'm in, this is the license plate number of the car, because in that moment, right, I honestly didn't know. I mean, what's to stop a police officer? We've seen this. What's to stop law enforcement from arresting me, a U.S. citizen? Nothing. Their good behavior, right? Their belief in following the law is what keeps them from arresting people who don't deserve to be arrested. And in that moment, we had seen examples of that already. And thankfully, they walked up and down cars for like 20 minutes. I guess they didn't find the person or whatever they were looking for. They pulled over to the side and they let us continue on. but it was really scary. And the only thing that made it less scary was I had my mom on the phone as a buddy. She knew where I was. She knew what kind of car I was driving. She knew what was happening. And that's the power that we have, is to have somebody else looking out for you. Yeah.
And I think we see that now. Like, I'm sure most of us have seen the videos of ICE like taking down people, and there will be like a community of bystanders that,
Yep.
you know, either do something or they don't, but they're there just to witness it, and they're there to see. Like, we saw that woman who got shot, you know, a few months ago, and there was multiple people there to witness that. So there's definitely importance in community, and in a weird way, stuff like that builds community for
Absolutely.
Americans. So there have been protests and controversy surrounding ICE operations recently. What are the limits of free speech and protest in these situations, and in these situations as students?
Yeah. So, off of a college campus, right, you have the same First Amendment rights as everyone else outside the boundaries of your university campuses, right? So if you want to go into the city and go to No Kings this weekend, you can absolutely do that.
Yeah.
First Amendment's going to protect you, right? Now, one of the things that gets more challenging for both students at public universities and private universities is what happens if you go to that No Kings protest and you're wrongfully arrested and you're wrongfully charged because the law is less clear about whether or not universities can take actions against students if that conduct off campus could in some way pose a threat to them being on campus. And what we're seeing often is universities trying to take action against students for what's happening off campus or what's happening on social media online. The Supreme Court, unfortunately, hasn't dealt with a lot of cases involving college students' rights. It's dealt with some cases involving high school students' rights. But we know that college students are at a very different very different point in their development than high school students. The high school lines of cases basically say that if your behavior outside of school, off campus, causes a disruption on your campus, your university, your high school can take action against you, right? We've seen some lower court cases involving college students that have kind of a similar tone to them. There was a case when I was in Minnesota. There was a mortuary science student at the University of Minnesota who made some really concerning posts online about using some of the tools that you use in mortuary science, the knives and stuff like that, to do some harm to people. Also, some very disrespectful comments about the donated cadavers that she was working with. And the university took action against her. Ultimately, that case went up to the Supreme Court, and for very specific reasons, the Supreme Court said, yeah, the university can take action against her. So it's pretty unclear. Like, if you get into trouble off campus, can your university kick you out? A lot of times I'd say that depends on what your student conduct code says,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of private universities have conduct codes that say things like, if you are convicted of a crime, we can give you the boot, right? And so there's a lot of leeway there for university administrators.
We kind of are going into rights and real world impact, but I feel like it's getting kind of repetitive. The next question is hate speech protected under the First Amendment? I think we kind of concluded that it is not.
It is protected.
It is protected.
Hate speech is 100% protected
Okay,
under
go
the
into
First
that.
Amendment.
Yeah.
This is one of the biggest myths about the First Amendment. What is not protected is what we call fighting words. Okay, so hate speech is speech about a group of people based on an identifiable characteristic that denigrates that group as a whole, right? Fighting words are words that are spoken in this face-to-face context that are designed to cause anger, likely to provoke anger, right? There's not a list. It would be really convenient if the Supreme Court would make us a list, like these are the words you don't say, but there's not a list. Students always want an example. It is contextual. It depends on the context. But I think there are absolutely situations where the N-word could be a fighting word, and you could be subject to criminal sanction, right, for that. But if you want to say terrible things like, you know, all Muslims are this, all black people are this, all Christians are that, absolutely protected by the First Amendment. Anti-Semitism, this is a common misperception. Lots of public universities are trying to crack down on anti-Semitism. Listen, it's awful speech. I don't like it. It's protected by the First Amendment. Yep.
In your experience, how can you even distinguish, I guess, the difference between, because I guess you can argue, like, let's say the N-word, or it's a fighting word or it's not a fighting word. You,
So,
as a lawyer.
It's all about the very specific context, and I'll give you a hypothetical example.
Okay.
So let's imagine there is a public university professor, and in the classroom, that public university professor uses a racial epithet directed at a student. That's a problem. That person can be fired. That person could probably be criminally sanctioned, right? Now, let's imagine we're in a classroom and a public university professor is showing a film that uses those kinds of words, right? They're studying a historical document that uses those kinds of words, right? That's different.
Yeah.
That's different. Is that film hateful? Are those documents hateful? Absolutely. But it's a different use of the word, right?
Yeah.
And so context in all kinds of speech, context matters very, very much.
So speaking about context and, you know, in our own speech and how we address hate speech, even if we interact with it on campus, how can students actually use their First Amendment rights to interact with hate speech and respond to it in a way that's polished and effective?
Yep. Well, first of all, I've told you, just because you have freedom of speech doesn't mean you have freedom from the consequences, right? On my campus at the University of Texas, there was a group of students who were having a pro-Palestinian protest, and there was a group of students who were having a pro-Israel protest. I actually happened to be teaching, as if fate couldn't make this better, a class called Global Protections for Speech, Press, and Protest. The protest actually happened to be during my class time. So I'm like, we're not going to class today. We're gonna go be a part of this. You can protest if you want to protest. You can watch it if you want to watch it. You can report on it as a journalist if you want to report on it, right? You just need to be there. I wasn't there to take a side. I was there to defend my students' rights to speak. Your ability to rebut hate speech can be really powerful, right? I tell my students all the time, I'm not going to stand for any kind of hateful speech. I call people out.
Yeah.
When I see misogyny, when I see anti-Semitism, when I see Islamophobia, transphobia, right? And we have to do that. And we have to do that in our organizations, right? We have to do that in our classrooms. We have to do that among our friends. There are people that I've stopped talking to. It was really, really difficult. I had some friends, some Jewish friends, who were saying things about Palestinians that I knew were not true, and I tried to engage them in a conversation. I think that's the first step, right? The first step is education, because lots of people say things because they're not educated. But some people don't want to be educated. And at that point, my philosophy is, I don't want you in my life anymore. Right? And those are tough choices to make, and it was hard to give up some of those friendships, but that's not who I am. And I would never want to be friends with people who are saying those things or acting in that way, because I don't want my students to think that I support that kind of speech. Right? I will defend someone's right to say it, absolutely, because the law says you can say all the dumb stuff, hateful stuff you want to say. But I also am clear that that's not what I believe, and that's not who I am.
Speaking about being able to, you know, distinguish like who and what you believe in, do you think the First Amendment is still able to hold the beliefs that the Constitution like wants to purvey, or does it need to be involved to effectively solve today's challenges?
That depends on all of us. That depends on all of us and our willing
Would it
to.
be our responsibility to evolve it?
Well, whether or not it's effective depends on our willingness to defend what it stands for.
Okay.
It depends on our willingness to tolerate speech that we don't agree with. One of the real issues that we have in our society right now is that people on both sides of the aisle want to shut down people who have opposing views. And I tell people all the time, a democracy works best when it's purple, when there are people who are blue and there are people who are red, because it forces us to compromise. And it forces us to realize that on most issues, we're actually all pretty much in the center of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Right? And what does that mean? That means fundamentally, we're all more alike than we are different. So whether or not we have a robust democratic discourse depends on all of us playing our part in that conversation, right? And doing that responsibly. The First Amendment has evolved a lot since 1791, right? And really, we didn't even get the first cases in the courts. The Supreme Court didn't start hearing cases until the early 1900s, right? There's plenty of room for the First Amendment to adapt to society today, but we're not even supporting the framework that we already have, right? Like, we need to be taking a more active role in using those rights, in defending those rights.
I think there has to be a willingness to adapt.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So after everything we discussed, what responsibility do we have directly, the people in this room, when it comes to protecting our First Amendment rights at a time where it seems to be very unprotected?
I'm going to give you 3 challenges when you walk out this door, and I've said most of them already.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is you have to be responsible for the content that you share. Each one of us plays a role in creating a better social media climate, a better venue for discussion. And so you have to take ownership over that and make sure that what you're sharing is not doing harm. The second thing is you have to vote, right? You absolutely have to vote in every election. You have to educate yourself about what's going on, right? And I think the third thing is you have to be brave. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to sit up here and tell you that this is easy. I've received death threats trying to stand up for what I believed was right. And I'm not going to stop, because when we work together as a collective is when we are the strongest, right? And when there are enough people pulling for what they think is right, then we actually make change, right? The civil rights movement wasn't one person. It was a collective of hundreds and thousands of people. And it wasn't easy work, right? Those people were physically assaulted, they were harassed, they were arrested, they were put in jail. And I truly believe we're in that kind of crisis in this moment. Mm-hmm. That we're at a tipping point and we have to defend our democratic values.
Mm-hmm. In a weird way, crisis does breed community. I think
absolutely,
as a young person, I see it a lot with people my age, where there's like this community where it's like there's a personal like feel that you have to do something by yourself, and I think that's prevalent throughout our entire campus. So I guess we can like leave it on there. I guess a good note, we have community.
It is a positive note, right? If you saw the way people in Minneapolis came together to defend their neighbors, right? We have to look out for one another. I have students who are undocumented. I have friends who are undocumented. I have students and friends who are trans. I have students and friends who are Muslim, Black, Jewish. Like, we have to take care of one another. That's the most important thing. Because at the end of the day, we're all human.
Yeah.
And we all deserve to be treated with dignity. And that's not happening right now.
No. So I think it's time we can move on to the pre-vetted audience questions. Somebody, oh, you can ask them? Okay, yeah.
You want
Kelmer
to?
will ask you.
Okay. So some of the pre-ready, the first one is going to be, is there a difference between the establishment clause and the free exercise clause?
Absolutely. So with freedom of religion, you got like double the bang for your buck, right? You get the free exercise clause, which says you have every right to be Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic, whatever you want to be, right? You also get the establishment clause, which says that the government doesn't have a right to impose religious beliefs. And we are seeing that under threat today, right? We're seeing movements to put the 10 Commandments into public schools, right? There was a big victory in Arkansas. All my days are blurring together, either early this week or late last week, where the court struck that down. We're seeing in the state of Texas, public schools being paid with taxpayer money to adopt Bible curriculum. The ironic part of that is the curriculum had thousands and thousands of errors that taxpayers are now going to have to pay to fix. All of those things violate the Establishment Clause, right? The Establishment Clause says government's over here, religion's over here.
It's very intertwined now.
It is. We're seeing that, prayer in schools is making a comeback. Students should not, under the Establishment Clause, be able to be forced to pray.
All right, the next question is, can our First Amendment rights be taken away with an executive order?
Yes and no. President Trump thinks he can. Technically, that's not the way the system is supposed to work. And we're seeing all kinds of challenges to his executive orders play out in court, right? The challenge is that kind of government action moves swiftly, right? Like when the Pentagon decides to take away press passes, that happens quickly. The legal fight to get them back takes a really long time. So it's very easy for that kind of stuff to inflict lots of damage while we're trying to go to court to get our rights back.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions? Because the other two we kind of already covered.
Perfect.
So if you want.
I have single-sided deafness, so I need you to yell at me. I won't take offense.
Gotcha. So on the topic of media and journalism, what are your thoughts on independent journalism? You mentioned your dislike for how the platforms are kind of unfiltered in a way, and that can create a lot of misinformation. So we saw I think this was discussed based on how saw how Gen Z shift because of TikTok on the algorithm. Now it's been bought by the designers, Larry Ellison, and we're seeing less of that. So, how much impact do you think independent journalism could have, and is it a good alternative to legacy?
Okay, so first things first, I support anybody who is sharing truthful, accurate information. I don't care who you are. Like, the beauty of the United States is you don't have to have a license to be a journalist, right? You don't have to be licensed to commit acts of journalism. The challenging thing, and you've pointed this out, is there are various ways in which your ability to get information is being compromised, right? Whether it is the algorithmic discrimination that happens on platforms, right, that pushes some information up and other information down and makes it harder for you to find. That's a huge problem. There are folks who argue that we should be able to sue platforms and prevent them from doing that. It's complicated, but the other thing is you're absolutely right. We've seen Larry Ellison just dismantle CBS, right? What does that mean ultimately? It means as consumers of news and information, we have more responsibility now than ever to make sure that we're getting information from trusted sources. One of the things that scares me is news influencers, right? There are a lot of people out there who are news influencers who don't necessarily have pure journalism as their interest. Their interest is in growing their audience and making money. And anytime that the point of journalism gets corrupted by how much money can we make, then there's going to be sacrifices made on the ability to be independent. And that's a challenge. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I know when pretty young, but I feel like the environment we're in, where it feels like a lot of people throughout the country just have a vast state of understanding of like reality. Not like opinions on different situations, but just what's happening or not.
Yeah.
It feels a lot of times like it's hard to even have a democracy or society where I'm just guessing that at least 25, 30% or more of Republicans believe that the election was stolen. And I don't know if that environment can even exist in the past. I guess I'm wondering, how do we make it so that we at least social media with like algorithms like showing different just completely fake things, thinking I guess reality is how do we make it so that we can have a conversation if we don't even know what's really true?
It's a great question. Bear with me because I'm going to give you a little bit of theory to answer that question, right? So prior to the internet and social media, right, most people got their news from one of the big three networks, so ABC, NBC, or CBS, or their local newspaper. And what that meant is that we had a shared notion of what the important issues of the day were, right? Whether that would have been climate change or the Vietnam War or whatever. Because we were all seeing the media telling us these are the things that you should care about, right? We don't have that anymore because we're all getting our news and information from very different places. And because the algorithms are showing you different things based on what you've seen in the past and based on what they think your views are, right? The thing that I tell people all the time is it's really easy to, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, to paint people on the other side of the political spectrum with a broad brush. My mom has a really good friend who voted for President Trump. And I said to her at one point, I'm like, Mom, how can you possibly be friends with her? And my mom said, I sat down and I asked her why she voted for President Trump. And she told me that because she's Catholic, abortion is the issue that she cares about the most. And she thought that having a Republican president would roll back abortion rights, and that's what mattered to her. And she said, and then I found out that we agree on basically everything else. That like her friends' views about immigration and climate change all align with my mom's very liberal views, right? They're more the same than they are different. And my mom said, I don't agree with her about abortion, but I can respect the fact that that's what she believes. And ultimately, we get past this polarization and this divide by reaching out to people and having conversations one-on-one, right? Reaching out to people and trying to foster these kinds of conversations that help us realize that we're really more alike than we are different, right? And you know, you have to stop to get to know people and ask them why they believe what they believe, because we've all had different lived experiences. Right? I grew up in rural Missouri. A huge chunk of my family are Trump voters and Trump supporters. And some of them I've been able to engage in conversation with and understand where they're coming from. I don't agree with them, but we've agreed to disagree, right? Others of them I can't have that conversation with because they're unwilling to, right? But I think we owe it to our society and our country to try to have those conversations, to try to realize that we're actually more alike than we are different. Yeah. Yeah.
So how does,
Also, put down TikTok. Like, stop scrolling, y'all. It is bad for your mental health.
Social media makes the polarization seem more extreme than it actually is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So just go outside and see people.
Yeah, like go get an ice cream cone and talk to people. Yeah.
so how does social media, speaking of social
Yeah.
media, how do your rights change with like protests on social media to say it's something that your school wouldn't like, being on social media than being like on campus?
I mean, listen, there are universities that will take action against you for any kind of speech off campus or on social media, right? So much of that, particularly a private university, depends on what your student conduct code says. The other thing that you have to understand is, you know, there are employers that will see you engage in certain types of speech and not give you an internship, not give you a job offer, right? Law schools, grad schools are doing that, looking at what people are saying. Professors are getting job offers revoked based on things that they've posted on social media. So just because you have a First Amendment right to say something doesn't mean you can be free from the consequences. The other thing that I will tell you is once you've posted it, even if you take it down, it's still out there, right? Because there are enough crawlers and archives and mirror sites that's going to be out there for good. And so there's no undoing it, which means that the pause has to come before you hit post. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, because y'all aren't watching, and I'm not either, 5-minute long TikTok videos, right? How much news can I tell you? And I'm not going to blame TikTok. I'm actually going to blame television news. And I'm actually going to blame Walter Cronkite. Sorry, Walter. Walter Cronkite realized that if he could take TV news stories down from 15 seconds to 10 seconds, he could get an extra story in every broadcast. Now, that's great if you want to know a little bit about a lot of things. But in a lot of things that are really complicated, and we actually need to know the depth to really be able to understand it and to be informed. And so television news, social media has created a culture where we don't want to read. And that's a real problem because the best way to understand complicated things is to read about them. And that's really, really challenging. So I saw a question in the back.
You had like it was when you were talking about like social media influencers and like kind of how there's been people who are not only like endorsed by government officials to kind of create these contents, but like also doing these contents that are getting a lot of like monetization off of that. And I was thinking more specifically about Curley and women to the future and how like damaging and like threatening that was not only the people who work there, but like the surrounding community. And I guess I know that we already talked about, I guess, like the danger of like misinformation in that context, but I think it does seem a little bit more, I guess, dangerous and threatening when we know that like the government is sort of backing this like blatant misinformation. So I guess my question would be like, what's something that we can kind of do on our level to kind of combat that and to kind of make sure that like we're not letting these lies into people and having them believe that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing is what this really means is we have to diversify where we get our news and information from, right? Because even what we would traditionally consider trusted sources of information, right? Think about the CDC, right? Like there's been a concerted effort to undermine expertise, whether that is scientists, whether that is doctors, right? I don't know about you, but I'm not going to take my nutrition advice from Kennedy. Like there's nothing in his background or pedigree that suggests that he knows more about medicine and health and safety than I do, right? And so I think the first thing is we have to diversify where we get our information from so that we know that we're getting quality information. I think the second thing that we have to do is help other people realize that, right? I can sit here and talk to you, and I might win over 5 or 10 of you, but you are so much more effective at changing the views and minds of your peers than I ever will be, right? And so when you see a friend going down the rabbit hole of misinformation, like, pull them back from the edge, right? Stop them. I do this to my mom all the time. She showed me something the other day. I'm like, Mom, that is like a completely made up video. The cars are driving the wrong way on the street, right? I have to like save her from herself. And we have to do that for all of us. And you guys are more effective at doing that with your peers than I ever will be, right? So I think some of that is just constantly talking about this awareness. And, you know, challenge yourself to go for a day without looking at social media and see what it's like. Especially right now with so much happening in the world, it can actually be really refreshing. Like, I've set rules for myself. I have to engage with the news because of what I do. I engage with the news for 30 minutes in the morning. I engage with the news for about 15 minutes over my midday to see what's happened. I engage with the news for 15 minutes or so around my dinner time. Not before bed, because that stuff gets me all riled up and then I can't go to sleep, right? And so you have to figure out what like the healthy parameters are for you. I had to like take alerts off of my phone because I was getting to the point, I have friends and family that live in the Middle East, right? And I was getting to the point to where I could not engage in my daily life because I was so like, okay, where's the next missile gonna hit? Who's intercepting what? Like, part of it is understanding what's happening and owning your responsibility for your own health. Yeah.
So like stuff like the manosphere and even alt-right pipelines, do you think, and with an algorithm like the For You page, that it's rotting our brains and making us lose our own, what do you call it, conscience, like train of thought or something?
Yeah, so there's a fundamental difference between how I got news when I was growing up and how you guys get news and information, right? News and information is served to you. It just comes at you continuously, right, in various feeds on your social media platforms. For me to get news and information, I had to seek it out, right? And that meant that I was actively making choices about what I was reading and what I was seeing. When we get into the sort of like scroll cycle, we're not making those choices anymore, right? The algorithms are making those choices for us. And that has long-term effects on our critical thinking. It has long-term effects on whether we're actually actively engaging with the content and challenging it, or whether we're just kind of accepting what we're watching and thinking about it in a really uncritical way. All of that stuff is really, really dangerous. And the more that happens, the more that you're going to get garbage content in your feeds, right? And so I absolutely have turned off auto scroll and all of that kind of stuff because I want to go to the places that I know give me trusted news and information. I don't need YouTube telling me what to look for. I don't need TikTok telling me who to follow or Instagram. I want to go and seek it out so that I have some control over it.
It needs to happen. I feel like being constantly overloaded with so much information. I think there is a privilege to the fact that we get to see so much information from around the world all the time, but it also leads to, you know, constantly being overloaded. It leads a lot of people being apathetic. And
it's exhausting.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
It's absolutely exhausting. And you know, when we study stress, there are two kinds of stress, right? There's acute stress, like, oh no, emergency crisis in this moment right now, right? And there's chronic stress. And chronic stress is actually much, much more damaging to us. And we are living in a chronic stress moment. right? And social media contributes to that.
It's purposefully done, yeah.
It's purposefully done, right? And it gives that feeling of our body always having to sort of be in this crisis response mode. And that affects everything, right? It affects your ability to sleep. It affects your blood pressure. It affects, how your brain rests when you're not thinking. Like, most of us have very little time during the day where we're not doing something. Like, it's a beautiful day. When you leave here, just go sit outside for 5 minutes without your phone, without anything else, and feel the sun on your face, feel the breeze, listen to the birds, right? Touch the grass and see what it feels like, because we don't do that. And there are all these studies that prove that that's like a whole reset for your body, right? And we don't do it enough.
Yeah, and, go ahead, yeah, yeah.
With all these things coming towards us, like Iran versus U.S., immigrants, people getting hurt, what are strategies or ways you think we can better educate ourselves to prevent more chronic stress?
Yep. I think you have to really set limits, right? So engage thoughtfully with social media and news. I think you have to rely on your community, right? And it's really easy to get yourself in a circle of talking about all of these things and all the negative things that we're seeing. And most of us do live a very privileged life. And trying to take little moments to focus on the really good things. Right? I have a game that I play. So I have 12-year-old godchildren who are triplets. It's a lot. But I have this game that I play with them. And it's the worst thing about your day followed by the best thing about your day. Because I always want them to end thinking about something good that happened. And a lot of times they'll say, you know what, Auntie? Now that I think about it, the worst thing wasn't really that bad. And so thinking about that framing, right? What are you grateful for in a particular day? Maybe it's that there's beautiful weather. Maybe it's that you just got paid and you're not having to worry about how you're going to pay for food today, right? But I try to find a little bit of gratitude every day to kind of help keep in perspective that there's other things in life to enjoy besides all of the chaos that we're surrounded by.
Thank you. Very much. We can just wrap up our thoughts with. That is a great ending.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me.